Hey kids, this is Ivan. How you doing? Well, it seems that Circle of Hands is the game that broke the internet. Well, maybe not really, but there certainly has been an awful lot of discussion about it and commentary. As we've been playing the game, not only have we been making recap and reflections videos, but other people have been making reflections on it, talking about it, commenting. The designer of the game is involved in the discussion, and there's even some commentary that you can't see that's in some private groups I'm in. A lot of commentary by Brian from the Stochastic Agency channel. In our internal group where we just talk about the games we're playing and all that sort of stuff. And, even though I've made a recap and reflections video about the second session, I wanted to go back and talk about some subjects that came up as we were all talking. This is kind of a reflection on the reflections, sort of. But two things that, came up over and over again were, why did you make the decisions that you did? So I want to talk about that a little bit. The decisions made, as a character, as a player in this game. And also character portrayal, because that came up quite a bit as well. But while I'm here, completely off subject, I wanted to. There were two things I wanted to mention which I just forgot during my recap video, which I felt bad about. And the first one was the real great symbolism, this perfect symbolism of the ghouls, as a separate component of the game, to the starvation that was going on as the gentry, this garrison, was slowly eating the peasantry alive. And so, what's the difference between eaten alive by ghouls or, having all your food being taken by the gentry and starving to death? Well, nothing, except the ghouls are a lot more merciful and quick. So even though the components were not related and aren't supposed to be related based upon game design, the symbolism, well, that's, you can do whatever you want with that. And Anthony is a master of stuff like that, so that was perfect. And that's one of those things, I was like, wow, that's really cool. The other thing that really came up to me in terms of like the tone of the game, the longer, well, it's more like the session had a greater emotional impact on me afterwards than it did during the session. But I think that's kind of how I normally navigate life and navigate stressful or traumatic situations. And for me, that session was all about the little boy that killed his dog to feed the family and members of the village, and the little girl that froze to death. And of course about the dog too, but it's really about the boy and the girl. Being a child, being helpless, and because children are helpless, they're totally dependent on somebody else, and having the people who care for you be just as helpless as you are. Having the foundations of your world rocked at that level, I don't think there's a greater degree of terror and horror possible. And so that really stuck with me as being like some of the salient moments of the game in terms of just how desperate the situation was. But anyhow, let's talk about decisions made in character and character portrayal. A lot of conversation came up about like why didn't Ingolf do something in the keep? Why didn't he become violent? Why didn't he use some kind of magic or try to solve the conflict or the tension, the conflict that was there with a more obvious conflict, with a challenge. He is a circle knight, all that sort of stuff. And I thought about that quite a bit because there are definitely these warring motivations within me. People remarked that they could see it, like how the frustration as a player and as a character, via the player. And these were all real. They were all very palpable. And there definitely was this, throwing the leader of the garrison through that stained glass window had crossed my mind. It was a serious consideration. And, actually there was a very strong temptation to challenge him to a duel by throwing a suitably heavy object through that window. But why didn't I? That's, definitely, I think the only thing that saved that window were the time constraints. Had things turned out, if we had more time, maybe something else would have happened, but that's, that's all hindsight. We talked a lot about, was that session better for not having a combat climax, or would it have been better if we did have sort of combat? And still, the jury's kind of out on that. I think we can make cases either way. But I definitely had some warring motivations at that point. Did Ingolf want to kick some ass? Yes. But, Ingolf is a fan of The Who. And he has heard, we won't get fooled again. Is killing this one guy, before the rest of them kill me, really going to make a difference? The guy next to him is going to be essentially the same guy. And that doesn't feed anybody down the valley. And, that brings up the point of the tripwires and the conceits of the game. The idea that things are going to go well for Rolke, for the Young King and Rolke, as long as all the tripwires in the venture don't get hit. And we don't know what they are, we don't know where they are. It's funny, also in hindsight, that I'm aware of the design elements that go into venture preparation. I've read the book, and I've thought about preparing my own ventures. And it's very easy as a player to, or what seemed to happen was I became aware of, okay, well, how many named characters are there? What do the components seem to be? I know that the lowest numbered component is going to be revealed to us, so it's a matter of figuring out, okay, well, this definitely seems to be some kind of social tension. This is not rocket science here. And then just kind of waiting to see what the other component, ended up being, having other named characters introduced. It's not a giant meta concern, but I'm kind of counting. I kind of know what's going to happen. There was an interesting question raised by Brian about why we didn't go to the ruined keep of or ruined fortress of the Black Wizards that had been destroyed by that garrison, some years ago. And I can't answer for Eli, but I can say for myself, it's because I just knew how many components there were going to be, and it was probably highly unlikely that the monster was living there. Maybe it was, but probably not, because I just kind of counted named characters and all that sort of stuff. So I kind of knew, and unlike a lot of other sessions, there's not really a hierarchy of threats. There are things that are in the environment, and it's up to us, and they're kind of morally gray, and it's up to us to choose, what do we address? Do we address them all that kind of stuff. So that's kind of tangential. Why didn't we go just follow that? Okay, whereas there's the Wumpus. This session was very, very different than the first session, and it generated a lot more discussion. Because the first session, I think, in hindsight, I didn't dislike it. I didn't like one over the other, but the first session was very, it was a lot closer to standard play. We showed up at a place, we figured out what was wrong, and then we, kicked the ass of what was wrong. Nothing wrong with that. That was fun. That was satisfying. Here, it was much different. And the struggle, part of the struggle I had was this knowledge as, and part of what I do when I play, and this is probably informs an awful lot of it, is I tend to naturally kind of jump into the character. And it's not necessarily conscious, but I become like, okay, well, I'm thinking like this character. And once again, Ingolf is shy. He's really pushing himself right up against his limits and over his limits, talking to these people this way. I found it very, very powerful. This is probably a different subject. That being a Circle Knight transcends the social strata, the social ranks, and in a very real sense, these characters are embodied with the authority to act, as Ron mentioned in his video response to me. And that's a very, very powerful thing, and something that transcends just this game, and speaks a lot about life. The game's fraught with symbolism: the named characters, unnamed characters, the condition of being a Circle Knight, this agency, this right to act, and this volition, all that sort of stuff. And certainly, I felt that as the Ingolf the Circle Knight, but it was more the understanding, not just the mechanical understanding of what would happen, the limited number of spells available to him, and the ones he had were not incredibly useful for kicking multiple people's asses. The idea that, well, gosh, how much of an effect can I really have? I really want to choke the living crap out of this guy and throw him through the window, but that's not going to achieve my ends. And there is this kind of warring meta concern as a player that I know that even, as long as I don't hit a tripwire, that things will actually turn out all right, that it will be a victory, if you will, for the young king and Rolke. And that's just kind of an interesting thing to consider, and that probably explains a lot of why Ingolf didn't act, is because, once again, he didn't really see personally that this was going to accomplish anything, even though he really desperately wanted to kill this guy. And so that's something I'm going to think about more. It's going to be interesting to see how that comes out in other sessions. But one of the things that that occurred to me is this idea that there's a consideration, perhaps, of what is best for, I hate to use the word the story, but the story. And it's interesting. I've been reading, and I'm just finishing up reading The Annotated Sorcerer, which has kind of given me a much better window, or a clearer window, into what I think is Ron's personal aesthetic, or MO. It's really, really interesting stuff, but it kind of, I'd like to hear his reaction. It kind of informed, or it gave, it showed a window, and which I wasn't really looking for. I just happened to be reading that today, on some of the comments he made. And, you know, I wonder if that's part of the consideration, this is taking volition as this character, because it's going to be not cool or epic, but just something that this character should do. In this case, it's something that might be, you know, better for the emergent story. And I tend to have more of a, even though that's cool, I tend to approach games with more of a, what would this character do right now? And sometimes that might not be the best thing for the story, which kind of ushers in portrayal of character. You know, Brian definitely mentioned some things about that, and you know, were there parts where did we necessarily represent the struggles of these characters, who they actually were? Did the characters feel or look different than the other characters that we had played so far? Because so far we've just played the 2 characters we created. Now we're going to rotate. I mean, I really want to get into playing all of the characters and seeing all the other people play all the other characters, at least the ones that live. But this is something that, you know, it's somewhat hampered by Hangouts, by any kind of medium like this. You know, we're playing over the internet where we really can't see all the body language. We can't see all the tone of the voice. We can't see all of the cadence, all that, you know, sort of stuff as well. And, you know, my experience of the sessions were that the characters felt extraordinarily different. You know, the character of Falk Wolfram really felt different right from the get-go than the character of Ingolf. They you know, approached situations and reacted internally to situations very, very differently. And that was just kind of informed by, I would guess, my conception of who they were. But I've noticed that a lot of my portrayal and experience of characters tends to be internal, and a lot of my portrayal tends to run, go along the way of maybe just tone of voice, or like I said, or cadence, or word choice, or body posture, or some body language, how I speak, as opposed to describing what the character's doing, you know, how they look, the facial expressions, you know, how they walk across the room, all that sort of stuff. Things that, you know, I might want to work on, maybe. You know, I'm not really sure if I want to, because it's not necessarily about a performance for me, but maybe, because of this medium where, you know, we need to kind of explain stuff more. What is this character doing? Because maybe we can't pick up on the signals as much as we could if we were in the same room. And also the other thing I mentioned a long time ago in a video was like unleashing, you know, your inner Mick Jagger, the idea that you make your gesticulations and your body postures and your tone of voice a lot more dynamic, because you're really trying to convey that to somebody that's, you know, across the world, you know, and looking through the glass. And I wonder about that as well. So that's something that I will have to think about. But certainly, if the portrayal didn't show, it felt very different for me. And, you know, I you know, felt that, you know, the portrayal of, you know, the other character by Eloy was different. They definitely did feel different. You know, Otto felt different from, you know, Hadrick the Black. But that's something that, you know, I thought about, because our group as a whole doesn't necessarily value thespianism. Maybe description to a certain point, but that's not something that we tend to do a lot. So it'll be interesting to see how that plays out as the sessions progress, and certainly as we put on the mantles of these other characters, especially the ones that we didn't ourselves write. You know, I'll be interested to see when I go back to playing, and actually after having watched perhaps some of these characters be played, you know, how will I step into them, and will they feel different? I suspect they will, but that will be something that remains to be discovered. But these are, you know, some things I thought about afterwards. You know, why did I make the decisions that I did? I can't speak for Eli. Why did I portray the character the way that I did? Is the way that I approach this game different than the way the game designer might approach it, in terms of, you know, making decisions or not? That's not to say that I don't want to make daring decisions to act as a Circle Knight. At the end of the day, that situation felt as if he couldn't make a difference. But I'm not hampered, but I have this meta knowledge that I could have, because as long as I don't hit the tripwires, then things turn out okay. I'm not saying that's necessarily a bad thing, but it's a thing. It's a thing, you know, to be considered. And I find it very, very funny that the entire game, I wasn't looking for the tripwires. I was conscious they were there. It's probably just because I had no way of knowing where they were. And tripwire placement is something that Anthony and I talked about a little bit. He talked about with the rest of us. I believe he talked to Ron about, and hopefully he's going to make a video about pretty soon, because that's a whole different subject. But the other elements, the components, how many components there were, this was something that I wasn't consciously looking for, but I knew they were there. And so when they showed up, I kind of just counted. I'm not sure if that was reflexive. I'm not sure if that's from my years of gaming and kind of automatically noticing things like that. I'm not really sure. Kind of interesting stuff. Anyhow, I blathered long enough, so looking forward to running it. And so hopefully today I will roll the dice and start some venture preparation.